Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, our 13th installment of Please Join Me. This is Joe Traina, and I have a guest with me today who has an incredibly impressive background and resume. I've known him for many years, and I have to confess and apologize that I did not know the extent of his work and the folks he's worked with and the subject of many of his shows, his lyrics. He's traveled all over the world, and his name is Stephen Cole. I'm, of course, delighted by your success, and I will read a little bit about what you've done from your resume. You're an award-winning writer. You've published 5 books, including that book about that girl, which I imagine is about Marlo Thomas. I Could Have Sung All Night, which is the Marty Nixon story, as many people know, the beautiful voice behind many famous actresses in many famous movie musicals, and a beloved person from what I know. Noel Coward is a show that Stephen has written. Stephen wrote Charlie Strauss's memoir, The Lyricist of Annie, am I right?
No, a composer.
Composer, pardon me. I assume lyricist because that's your stock in trade, but I stand corrected, of course. The composer of Annie and many, many other shows of note. Put on a Happy Face is from one of them. And Stephen has written 10 award-winning short stories, several articles published and translated under the banner of the Vienna Jewish Museum. His first novel, Freak Show, which is a time travel showbiz coming of age that takes a nerdy 30-year-old through Ethel Merman's closet. Musical science fiction, folks. Back in time and forward again. His 25-year career has taken him from New York City. I'm laughing because it's like the career of a lifetime for just about anybody. New York City, London, Middle East, Australia, an off-Broadway musical called After the Fair, which is based on, what is that?
Thomas Hardy short story on the Western Circuit.
Right. And music by Matthew Ward, winner of 5 Dallas Theater Awards for its world premiere. Stephen's been nominated for the Outer Critics Circle Award for Best Musical. He's been produced in this show, I believe, has been produced in London to great acclaim. The original cast CD featured Michelle Paulk, who was lovely enough and generous enough to record a song on my first CD years ago. Stephen has presented his prestigious Night of the Hunter, Night of the Hunter, music by Clabe Richardson. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today.
I am so happy to be with you, Joe. It's great. No, you can't keep reading my bio. It's too long. It's too much.
It's exhausting.
Well, because I'm old and I've done a lot of things.
but a lot of people your age have, unfortunately, for whatever reason, they've wanted to do a lot of wonderful things and you've been able to achieve them. So it's a great accomplishment. And listen, you've given all this stuff to the world. And I always feel that way about artists, that if they're able to get it together and be generous and, focus in on things that they love or things that they're interested in, everybody benefits. So
I'm totally with
that's
you.
Off.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, as I always ask lately, what are you doing now? We're somewhat hindered, of course, by the pandemic, and I hope people are making art and doing the best they can with their artistic endeavors. But tell us, how are you faring up?
Yeah, it's been a tough period, very. I mean, one of my side jobs, which is a really fun one, is I work with the Rhodes Scholar Group, which is a worldwide organization. They bring seniors to New York to be on my theater orgy tour for a week. We take 3 different shows and we show them everything. And losing that, as soon as this happened, we lost theater, so we lost the tourists, and we certainly lost the seniors coming. So I really do miss taking them around. But I've been working on my shows. I have 2 shows that were supposed to go up still in this coming year. But we don't know. They keep being pushed back and pushed back. 2 new musicals. One is an older musical called Saturday Night Gross Singers, and that's supposed to happen in Sonoma whenever things are safe. And because we did our show Merman's Apprentice in the same theater last fall, which was fantastic. And the other one is Going Hollywood, which is written with David Crane, my cohort who went to the Middle East with me. And we wrote a musical, an original musical, and it's being done in Dallas. And we're actually going to sneak down to Dallas and do a reading with fully masked and fully socially distanced, and nobody will talk to each other. We'll all be in different rooms. It's really kind of bizarre. So we've been working on those, getting that ready. And I've been writing my second novel. And that's been my saving grace, really, because theater seems so far away, producing wise, that I just said, well, what can you do? You can sit down and write. And so I'm getting in on towards the end of this second novel, which I'm very excited about because it's got Netflix potential. It's got movie written all over it. So it's really exciting and good and difficult and fun. And I get up every day, 7 days a week, I write. So that's what I've been doing artistically, and keeping as safe as possible, as we all must, and only going shopping in my mask, and sometimes riding my bike. I have to get out a little bit in the mask, everything in the mask. And the glasses fog up, but we do it. We keep moving.
Yeah, I've had that fogging issue myself. I want you to harken back, please, because you mentioned some things. Why don't you tell us first about where you're from and your youth? I've seen many, many photographs of your youth in cowboy costumes, and dressed up as a bunny, and riding a pony, and so none of those. Yeah, no, seriously, and sitting in the living room with the slipcovers on the couch and the plastic on the lampshades. I grew up in something similar. So seriously, I'd like to hear.
It was in Brooklyn. Where else? In Canarsie.
That's where I live. Yes.
I grew up in Brooklyn and Canarsie. Before that, East New York. It was a great childhood when I look back at it. We played in the street. We did all that stuff. We rode our bikes. We went to school. I was a very smart kid and enjoyed school and got high marks and became an SP student. Do you remember what SP was? That was
special placement.
Yes.
I remember.
We skipped 8th grade.
Yep.
So when I graduated high school, I was barely 16. And during that period, I also was a performer. So I knew I wanted to sing and act, and I took voice lessons. And at 14, I did my first professional summer stock job. And then 14 and 15. So those summers, I was away with great people in 1 week summer stock, learning how to do it. And it was wonderful. We got paid zero, no money. We were apprentices, and it was a blast. But after my first season of summer stock, I had a resume with 10 musicals on it, because you did a show a week. And so suddenly I had a resume, and it was pretty great. And I came home from that first year of summer stock in Brooklyn and went straight to an old Selectric typewriter and wrote my first musical, because somebody else had written a musical that summer, and his name was Charles Bush. We all know Bush now as a famous playwright and performer, and he and his friend Andy wrote a musical, and they asked me if I could write a song for it. And I don't know how they knew I could do that, but I did. And I wrote my very first song, and I sang it for them. They thought it was pretty good, and that was the end of that. And then I said, well, if they can write a musical, I can write a musical. And I came home and I started doing that. And it was a 1930s musical called Everything's Fine. And if you've ever seen Anything Goes, you've seen Everything's Fine, because I basically did something that was the smartest thing I think any kid could do. I copied the style of Cole Porter, and I learned how to write lyrics by aping how he wrote lyrics and finding out how they were crafted and taking them apart and putting them back together and writing in a sophisticated way that I had no right to. And I found a kid in high school who played the piano, And I said, "You're going to write music to my show." And he said, "Who are you, Mama Rose?" And I said, "You could do it." And we became best friends, and we wrote the show. And he went off to Brooklyn College, and I was still in high school. And he said, "They're going to let us do the show." And so I got to go to Brooklyn College and direct and choreograph and wrote a big part for myself. And even while I was still a senior in high school, I just cut school and went and did it. So this was really my childhood. I kind of always knew what I wanted to do, and I just did it. I'm lucky.
You wrote a song for Charles Bush, whom I'm hoping will be my guest sooner rather than later on Please Join Me. He's pretty dear friend. I wouldn't say that we hang out all the time, but we communicate frequently. And I did a turn in drag in a couple of movies that I did for my son. So in a way, we're in the same club. And he inspires me. I ask him about makeup and costume. But tell me about the song you wrote for him.
Oh gosh, the very first song I ever wrote. It was called "The Pleasure's Mine." And it was supposed to be the show that they had written. They had written the book of a musical, no lyrics, no music. And it was a takeoff on all the Mickey and Judy movies, Babes in Arms and Babes on Broadway and Babes in Prison. And they asked me to write a song that would be for some kind of vampy character, to vamp somebody. That's all I really remember. And I did, and I can sing a little of it for you because I can still remember.
Please do. Please sing.
And it went, "A boy is a toy to me, just one of many fish in the sea. So if you want to play, that's just fine, 'cause honey bear, the pleasure's mine." And that was what I wrote. I wrote the music and the lyrics. And then when I was writing my show, Everything's Fine, with Alan Matlick, the composer of that show, I just sang it to him and made him write it down. And I let him take the credit for the music because I was not a composer. I was a lyricist. And it stayed in the show. And it was done in Brooklyn College, as I mentioned. It was done years later in 2 productions in a theater in Brooklyn called the Harry Warren Theater by the Irene Ryan Rep. Remember Irene Ryan?
Yes, we all know her from Beverly Hillbillies.
The last thing she did was Pippin on Broadway. She stopped it going that. But anyway, that theater did the show twice, after we did it in college, and that song stayed with it always. And so I thank Charles Bush, and whenever I talk about my career, because he was Chuck back then, Chuck Bush, and we were friends. Oh yeah, and there was no drag that summer at all. I think it was way before he did all that, and it was amazing. So it started me. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have thought about writing a musical, and so I did, and then I let it go away, writing musicals, for quite a little while, because I was performing and I was acting, and I was in Equity, and I was in SAG, and I was in AFTRA, and I did a lot of extra work in movies. I was constantly in movies, and when I was a young kid and looked young, and then that all went away because I wasn't a young kid anymore. When in my early 20s, suddenly, boom, you're old. And so I went back to the writing. And only recently have I gone back to any kind of performing, and that's because I'm still.
Now, you mentioned Cole Porter, and you mentioned how in your first song or show, you mimicked or were very influenced by the sophisticated lyrics and the witty, the bon mots and all of that. I always have a Cole Porter on one of my records. There's always a Cole Porter, because his music lends itself very well to jazz.
Yes.
His chord construction takes, as musicians say, goes to nice places. It goes to places where it can be very interesting, very beautiful. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan.
If people say to me, who was your teacher, I would have to say Cole Porter. I took it was a book, a coffee table book called Cole. and I dissected all the lyrics. I learned how they were constructed. Lyric writing is a very specific craft, and if you do it right, and if you rhyme correctly, and he was a master. Yes, the music is gorgeous and wonderful, but you take a song like You're the Top with 18 choruses that are so perfectly scanned and rhymed, and jokes all land beautifully. And you figure out how do you do that? And then I copied those styles of songs. And I remember actually thinking, oh, you're just copying these styles. And I didn't realize till years later it was the best way to go to school and to figure out how to do it right. And great work inspires me all the time. It's rotten work that makes me not want to write a song or write anything. In fact, I'm constantly reading good writing as I'm writing my novel, because if I read mediocre writing, I become mediocre. So if I read really great writing, it just inspires me to write well. I think it all began with mimicking. That was it. And the same way with singing. As a singer, I mimicked. I put on that record, remember records, and Annie Get Your Gun, and I could either be Ethel Merman or Bruce Yarnell, and I could do any of them because I could mimic, and that's how I learned how to do that too. So Cole Porter. In fact, my name, is not really Stephen Cole, but it is because of Cole Porter. My real name was Stephen Mitchell, but somebody had it in one of the unions, so I had to change it. And I changed it on the spot because he was my idol, and I was 18. So there we are.
And I would guess, in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, was Mitchell and Ellis Island?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was. I think what I always recall is Muchnick. Yeah. Yes, my father was a Muchnick. And he used to say, we wanted to name you Ezekiel Muchnick. That's a good name.
Perfect.
Great name.
Perfect.
But yeah, Mitchell was just, they threw it at them, I'm sure.
Well, the old joke, and I'll tell you a recent telling of it, a funny twist. Ken Poplawski, the clarinetist, who's wonderful and an inspiration to me. Somebody said to him once, you ever think of changing your name? He said, yeah, how do you like Joe Poplawski?
Right.
So tell me now a little bit about, I'm going to go to your books a bit. Yes. You wrote a book about that girl, book about Marlo Thomas, ostensibly.
It's really about the TV show.
Okay.
So yeah, it's about her, creating the TV show. I had written some special material songs for her. She had hired me, and over the years, really for like 20 years, I've written special material for her. Marlo is not known as a great singer, but Marlo can put a comedy lyric across. So if she's going to do some kind of tribute to Alan Alda, she'll call me up and say, I'm going to do a tribute to Alan Alda. Everybody calls him Mr. Nice Guy. Let's do something that says how not nice he is. So I'll write a song to that, and I'll usually write it to a melody she knows, like Making Whoopee, Mr. Nice Guy, and because she's not really known as a singer, and we cling to the tune. And so then I was offered an opportunity to write a book for a series on television shows. And I thought, I should really do that girl, because I thought I knew her, number one. And number two, it was a seminal TV series about the first girl to live alone in New York and work as an actress. She's before Mary Tyler Moore. Mary Tyler Moore was the single girl living alone, but Marlo on That Girl did it first. And she did it with her friend Gloria Steinem's approval. And so I knew there was a really interesting book there. Plus I get to synopsize every episode of every season and who said that girl. And I had to watch every episode again.
Well, that's all right. Ted Bessel is a pleasure to watch.
Well, yes, he is. They were all good. And some of the episodes were better than others, let's just say, and some really were crap. But it was a wonderful project to work on, and it's still out there. In fact, it's available on Amazon but not as a book, as an ebook. It's the only way I can make a buck these days with an ebook. So you can get the book, but I don't make any money on it.
Who reads it?
Who reads it?
Yeah.
You know, there are groups on Facebook, That Girl fans. There are fans.
No, I didn't mean that. I meant who is the voice of your ebook?
Oh, no. It's just an ebook.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course, it's not an audio.
Yeah, no. I should.
Yeah,
I could get her to read it. Oh, baby, but that's not going to happen now.
Okay.
Not going to happen at all. And in fact, I've been in touch with her this year, but nothing much is happening for anybody. So no songs are being written. And so my other book that I think my major work at the moment is the Marty Nixon story. I Could Have Sung All, which I wrote with Marty. I mean, it's her memoir, and I was the ghost's ghost. She was the ghost singer,
right,
and I was the ghost writer, but she made sure from day one that I would get credit. And that's been a wonderful thing because she didn't get credit. And so it's both of our books. And now that Marnie, who was a wonderful good friend, once she passed on, I carried the torch. I carried the Marnie Nixon torch, and with her daughters. And exciting news will be happening on that front with that book, but I can't talk about it yet. But there might be something else, some other life for it. So we'll next episode.
Yes, believe me, there's enough for several. There certainly is. Tell us about Noel Coward, who's a character that I've always been fascinated by, Well,
he was my first book, and also I had a choice there. An editor, I was so lucky. He said, "Listen, I can get this book done for you. You can write a book." I had never written a book. I didn't know I could sit down and write all those pages. And he said, pick a star who you might want to write about it. It's a bio-bibliography, which means part of it is bio, and then you've got to go through everything in their life, a bibliography type thing. And so I said, well, I will either do Betty Hutton or Noel Coward. And he chose
tough choice
because they're so much alike.
Yeah.
And I was interested in Betty Hutton too. But so I did the Noel Coward, and it turned out to be a labor of love, not much money made there, but I got to research his entire career at the Lincoln Center Library when all you had were clipping files. Then you would pick up a piece of newspaper and it would disintegrate in your hands because it was from 1920. But I made notes and I wrote things down and I Xeroxed, and the book happened. And the book became very important because the Noel Coward estate would use it. They told me they keep it on their desk. It is so
That's great.
And I'm really proud of it. It's totally out of print. And if you went online to buy it now, it would be $500. I own one copy, so I can't even give anybody a copy.
Okay, now, Stephen, of course, I'm going to ask you about your interesting, lovely, funny relationship with Ethel Merman.
Ethel Merman, oh my God. Well, I was a fan forever.
You were a kid on 9th Avenue. Tell it right. That kid on 9th Avenue.
Yes, that story's I'll tell you that story because you know that story. But I was always a fan. From the minute I found out that there was a different recording of Gypsy, because I had the movie record.
Okay.
And I listened to the movie, which is not Ethel Merman and not even Rosalind Russell. It's Lisa Kurt singing. Dubbed. And one day I listened to the radio as a kid in Brooklyn, and on came this voice doing Rose's Turn, and my mouth fell to the floor, and I became a big fan. I bought the Annie Get Your Gun record, and the reason I didn't have the record was I belonged to the RCA Record Club. Do you remember those?
I do.
And so it was a Columbia record, so you couldn't get it. So I had to actually go to Sam Goody and buy it. And I did, and I just became I became enamored with that sound, with that personality. She was funny. I watched her on TV, and years and years and years go by, and in her last 2 years, I became friends with her. Now, how
did that happen? Of course,
happened because I was in between careers, in between the acting and the writing, and I thought, well, what should I do in show business? I'll become a producer. Isn't that easy? Right.
I have my own stories.
But I went to see Ethel do her symphony concert up at Lehman College with our good friend David Janone. We went together to see her, and because he was a big fan. And I came home with the program, and in the back of the program was the name and phone number of her manager, Bob Gardner. And I had this idea that I wanted to put her symphony concert on television and that I could produce this. And it was the beginning of cable TV. And I picked up the phone because I was in my early 20s and I just could. And I called him up and he was home. And he answered, and I said, I want to do Ethel Merman on TV and her symphony concert. And he said, well, you know, she looks terrible on TV. And I said, well, we'll make her good. He said, okay, well, here's a thought. Next year, she's going to be playing Carnegie Hall for the first time. And if you could bring cameras in there, you can do it. And I got off the phone and I had to scramble. And I found people who I knew, who knew people who had actually produced television. We made a budget, we made a proposal. We decided to go to a fledgling cable station called CBS Cable. And it was owned by CBS. And they were an arts channel, and I loved them. I mean, they were so artsy that every show was introduced by a man in a tuxedo. and they also had sponsorship. And I saw that they had a craft music hall, like in the old days. And so I said, well, what if we got craft? And we had these meetings with these other TV people who were involved with me. And they said, here's an idea. Go through the back door. And I don't know what that meant, but it meant go to Kraft Cheese directly, see if they'll sponsor it, and then bring it to the show. So I went to, not to Kraft, but to their advertising agency, J. Walter Thompson.
There you go.
I wrote the president of J. Walter Thompson with my proposal and my budget and everything. And the phone rang one night from Chicago. And he said, I think it's a great idea. Go for it. You can go into CBS Cable and tell them that Kraft will sponsor this. I was like, unbelievable. So I did. And I went to CBS. And then the roll is on and it's starting to happen. And I'm dealing with Bob, her agent. And we become very good friends. And he comes and sees all the rare video I have of Ethel Merman. I'm dealing with a woman named Anna Sasenko. Does that ring any bells to you? She was the producer of the concert for the Museum of the City of New York. Anna, you will know her as a composer and lyricist if you know she wrote the song, Darling, je vous aime beaucoup.
Of course.
Ne sais pas what to do. She
Big
was
hit.
God's manager, yes. And Anna was a tough cookie, and I would talk to her on the phone. I had a part-time job as a bookkeeper down by the World Trade Center, and she would call me up and say, why don't you take me to lunch at the Russian tea room, and we'll talk about the show. And I didn't have 2 quarters to throw together, so I never took her to lunch. But we talk, and time goes by, and I'm friends with Bob Gardner. And the concert is coming closer, and CBS Cable goes bust and off the air. Oh, we're finished. Except we go to HBO, we go to Showtime, we go to all of those places. No one is interested in videoing Ethel Merman at Carnegie Hall, despite how wonderful that sounds to us now. And so I just get to go to Carnegie Hall as a patron and watch her concert as a guest. And we go backstage, and Bob Gardner introduces me for the first time, even though I had met her at Corvettes when she signed her records. And she didn't remember.
And then you had a milkshake or a soda in one of those silver bottoms at the lunch counter.
Yes, exactly. And so, but there I am backstage at Carnegie Hall, and she has heard all about me and my videos. And she looks at me and she says, I'm coming to your house. And 2 days later, she showed up in a taxi. I looked out my window on 9th Avenue and 23rd Street, and it was literally like I was in a That Girl episode. And she came up the stairs with her son, because she wanted to show off all her stuff, and with Anna Sasenko. We had cooked dinner. We cooked chicken, I remember. And she said, she loved the chicken. She said, your chicken is better than Elaine's, and bigger portions, too. And then when she spilled some rice on the floor in my living room, she's on her hands and knees picking up rice. Sure. And I said, get up, you don't have to. Oh yeah, I'm not leaving a mess. We watched the video. She loved watching herself. She would comment on things. My favorite was there was this concert from 1964 from the BBC, and she said to her son, you see me there? I wasn't wearing a bra. And if I did that now, they'd hit the floor. That was Ethel, and she
was outspoken. She was funny.
Very outspoken, and if she spoke in my living room, I could hear her miles away. It was wonderful. It's just a natural. It was a natural big sound. She was warm. She was lovely. The next morning, she went on television on one of those early morning TV shows and talked about seeing the short subjects that I showed her from 1930, which at that point was more than 50 years earlier. And she said, I can't believe it. I went to a friend's house and he showed me these shorts where I was, 20 years old. And she said, at one point she pointed and she said, my voice sounds so tinny. I sound like Ann Miller. So, but she loved it, and she sent us a lovely thank you note, which at the end said, P.S. sorry about the rice, because she had spilled rice on the floor.
It's funny what they remember.
Right, and from there on, it became, she brought all of her friends over. She would bring like 20 people to my apartment. We'd arrange these parties and show videos. And it would usually be Ethel, one of her female friends, like B'nai Venuta, who was a co-star of hers, Maria Karnilova, who was Tessie Tora in Gypsy, people like that, and 20 men, 20 gay men and Ethel. And she loved having them as her audience. And they would all cheer at every musical number. And then she would take us all out to dinner. And there would be 2 women and 20 men. And she'd say, all right, we're all going to sit boy, girl, boy, girl.
Right. Very funny. Well, you were like, so in other words, you were like the Nasa McMahon of 9th Avenue.
Yes,
that salon.
Exactly, but they were always Ethel Merman salons. And it was only showing her stuff. And and one time I actually made a faux pas by putting on a tape from SCTV. Remember SCTV?
I do.
And they did a parody of her.
Right.
And it was, I thought it was hilarious. And her face was blank.
Right.
It was like nothing, no laughs, no nothing. And I thought, I'll never do that again. So it was all about, showing her at her best. And we did. And we just had these wonderful, wonderful parties. And then I would go to her apartment and bring her things. And I remember the first time I knocked on the door, she lived at the Surrey Hotel. She had a big apartment in the hotel. And it was snowing and horrible out, and I looked like a snowman. And she looked at me and she went, the snow is snowing, the wind is blowing, but I can weather the storm. And I thought, shit, Ethel Merman singing to me. And I thought I could die happy then. So it was an amazing relationship. And then she got a brain tumor, and which eventually killed her. And I only got to see her that one last time in her apartment after they tried to operate. And it was, I wrote about that in my first book, because the first book is really, as you mentioned, this nerdy kid goes through Ethel Merman's closet and winds up back in time in Sophie Tucker's dressing room. And, but he's really gone there to save her from this fate worse than death, which is how she was with the brain tumor. She said to me, it was very sad. She turned and said, no more singing, no more singing. and she, she was talking out of the side of her mouth. But the most wonderful thing that did happen was I reminded her of a song she sang in an Eddie Cantor movie by Harold Arlen called First You Get Me High, Then You Get Me Low. And she opened up her mouth and she sang. And I realized that the singing comes from a different part of the brain than the talking.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very much so.
That's where it came from. And even she was surprised. And it was pretty magical.
I'm going to move ahead, if I may, because I know this is quite an adventure you had when I believe you were contacted by, I like to think it was some sheik who said, I understand that you're quite well known writing lyrics of musical. We'd like to have one. We're flying you over to Qatar. Now you tell the story, because I know it's a great story.
It was even simpler than that. I'll try to keep it brief because it takes about a year. But the story, I got an email out of the blue that said in broken English, "We want you write musical. How much?" And I thought, oh yeah, right. We get these emails all the time. And underneath it, it said, "Call this number in Dubai." And I thought, yeah, right. And give me your social security number too. And I wasn't going to call a number in Dubai on my telephone. So I wrote them back and I said, "No, you call me." And the phone rang immediately. And a voice on the other end said, "We want you write musical. How much?" I said, wait a minute. I don't know what kind of a musical, where's it going to be, how many performances, how big do you want it? They didn't speak much English, so they said, "You write questions, email, we answer." So I called up my agent. I was with ICM at that time, and I said, "I just got the greatest email." It said, "How much?" The agent said, "No, nothing's ever going to happen with that. Don't be ridiculous." I said, "Write them back and ask for the moon. Ask for so much money like you never did." And he did. And they came back with the answer, and it was no. And they said no, but we went back and said, "What will you pay?" And the number was just slightly lower than what we asked. So we said, "Fine, yes, do it." I said, "It doesn't even matter. I won't have to rhyme. It won't be in English." But it was. And it turned out to be the beginning of the greatest adventure I ever had. And I'm so glad that I answered that email. It put me together with my collaborator, David Crane, who also got a similar email. We had never met. We had never worked together. But I had been begging them, "Who's the composer going to be? Who's the composer?" And they finally said, "You will write show with David Crane." And I looked him up, and he had done 25 Broadway shows as a dance arranger and an orchestrator. And he was just working on the movie of Chicago then. So that places us. And I thought, wow. And he didn't believe it was going to happen either. But I believed it was going to happen because I saw those dollars. I knew what the money was going to be. And I didn't care what would happen. And eventually they flew us over to Dubai first, because that's where the production company was. But then they flew us from Dubai to Qatar to show us where we were doing the show, which was in the largest domed soccer stadium in the world, a football field. "We're going to do a musical in a football field?" And they said, "Yes, and you may have 20 camels, 16 Arabian stallions, and 14 falcons." Falcons? Do they tap?
Reminds me of the scene. Reminds me of the scene in Dietz and Goff's office in Yankee Doodle Dandy. He's looking through the pages. What, horses?
But here it was like they wanted us to have them, and flying carpets, and I'm writing all this stuff down, and they expect me to come up with the plot that same day.
Same day.
At first, they had a plot that was about a kid who couldn't get into a sports academy. His father didn't want him to go. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty boring.
You know what it sounds like? Time out for Ginger.
And then they came up with another plot, which was a sultan's son is locked in the palace. And he can't leave because he's so spoiled, and he only wants one thing, a star in the sky. Okay, there's a musical for you. And I had to take that and embellish it and turn it into 90 minutes. And at the time, I was working on Marty Nixon's memoirs. In fact, when David and I went to the Middle East, I didn't tell her I left because she thought, well, he must be home writing. I was supposed to take one job and go to another job, but I was doing all of them at the same time. I would ride my bicycle up to her house on the Upper West Side, and I'd be thinking about, what am I going to do with this Sultan's son? And I came up with this plot, and I came up with these journeys through time and space, and David wrote wonderful music, which I never expected in a million years, because I thought, who cares if this is good, right? It just has to be and make the money. But it turned out it was good, and we were writing at the top of our form. And once they got the first draft, which we finished, we were given 6 weeks to write a musical, and we finished it in 5. And I rested on the 6th, and then I sent it off in an email. And then we got our first payment. We got our first payment on signing, we got our second payment on delivery, and the third was supposed to be when the show was on, which was only 9 months later. And so we got our first 2 big, large payments. It was wonderful, right in the bank. And we were then shipped off to London to sing songs for them. We went to Bratislava to pre-record the orchestra, which was a 60-piece symphony orchestra. And chorus, the Bratislava Opera Chorus was doing our stuff. Wound up re-recording again in London. We went, then suddenly everything went dead because they went into rehearsal. They cast it with British actors and Croatian acrobats and Russian ballet dancers, and they hired an Italian opera director. So we get best in whole world. And of course, we were the 2 Jews in New York writing the show. And so we were the best in New York. And we then were brought to Qatar a couple of days before to see the last rehearsals and to get to see the show and sit there with the Emir of Qatar and 1,000 foreign dignitaries for the opening of this soccer stadium. And there were 2 shows that weekend for the opening. One was the Cirque du Soleil, and the other was my brand new musical with David Crane. And it was incredible. And they did have flying carpets and camels pooping all over the place. And it was so bizarre and so fabulous. And in the end of the story is they never paid our final payment. So we got screwed a little bit, and we were kind of, oh, what a story we have, but we didn't get all the money. We came back home, did some interviews. In fact, a great 2-part interview with Peter Felicia, wonderful writer.
Oh, I know him well.
Everybody got to know the story, and everybody said, you got to do something with this. And so David Crane and I wrote a 5-character musical called The Road to Qatar. And it opened in Dallas, Texas. It won a bunch of awards, and it opened off Broadway, and it's played London. And you could call it our revenge, because we used all the characters, all the people. We changed everybody's name to protect us, including us. And now we've got that, and we've got a CD of that, and that. It is the most un-PC show you ever saw, because we make fun of the Jews and the Arabs and the Italians and everybody we could possibly make fun of.
Good.
And it's a very funny show, and I'm very, very proud of it. So that's kind of, in a quick nutshell, the whole Qatar thing. There's a lot more, because I've taken to doing that show as a one-man show now. And I play all the characters because I love doing the accents, and they were amazing. The only downside was not making the final payment, and that we thought we would be friends with them forever. David Crane was the optimist in the group. He thought his music would bring peace to the Middle East.
Very good.
Good luck with that.
Right. Now, why did you ever find out? Why didn't they pay you at the end? You fulfilled your obligation.
Never really knew. We were always told that it was by other people that it was kind of a possibility with the Middle East, that they would not pay all the money. My feeling was that they overspent so much on this production. Right. That they spent so much money, and they traveled all over the world and lived beautifully, you know, that somehow there was no money left. I think the Emir gave them X amount of dollars to do this, and they overspent, and they just didn't have the money.
Sure.
The actors, the West End actors, these were people who were in Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis. They were stuck there in Qatar. They did the show for a week, and but they went on strike because they had something to do. And they said, we're not going on tonight. So they picked themselves up, the producers, flew from Qatar to Dubai, which is only 1 hour, came back with bags full of money and
that sounds right.
And they took, so I should have stayed. I could have gotten a bag of money. But
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they didn't get stuck. Ultimately, that used to happen to actors. That used to happen to actors, as you well
know. I know. But it was an
frequency.
Incredible. It was. I would have paid for the experience. It was such an amazing cross-cultural.
Well, one of my questions, and I hope that the listeners will be curious about this as well, is how were the notices in Qatar?
There weren't any.
Walter Kerr, Boffo. It'll run for weeks.
We were on the front page of a Qatari paper because the emir gave it as a gift to the country. He said, you can come for free to see this. And I went, no, make them pay. I want my royalties.
No, that's how they keep the peasants happy, Stephen.
Yes, I know.
If they throw them a show once in a while, they're not going to revolt.
It was a great show.
So tell me, how did you come to it? I mean, and then you could also please tell me, you work with different composers. I'd love you to talk about a couple of the folks that I know well and love. I see here Jeffrey Saver, do I not?
Yes.
And also Todd Ellison.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, so tell me, how do you work with these guys?
Well, collaborating is that's the word, collaborating. I started out without knowing that I would have so many different collaborators. Part of me, career-wise, if I look back, I go, you probably would have been better off with just one collaborator. There's Rodgers and Hart and Rodgers and Hammerstein and the Gershwins, and the fact that they stuck together mostly was good for business. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But for me, I started out writing 2 shows at the same time when I got really serious. And one was with Matthew Ward, and that was After the Fair. And one was with Jeff Saver, and that was Dodsworth. And the reason I was doing 2 at the same time was that Jeff would be out of town, musical directing a show, and he wouldn't be available, or Matt would be doing something, and I kept writing. And to me, it was my one goal. So I thought, well, if I can't write this show, I'll write that show. And so I went back and forth. And by the time I was done, I had 2 shows. And I thought, well, this isn't a bad thing. If I write with a bunch of different people, you never know which thing is going to be on the front burner or the back burner. And Dodsworth happened to get on first with Jeff Saver. And that was my first big professional production, starring Hal Linden and Dee Hoade and Beth McVeigh in Fort Worth, Texas at the Casa Mañana. And it was a little bit of heaven when I look back. And to get your first musical on the stage with stars, no less. And I learned something every single day. It was hell, it was heaven.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the incomparable Stephen Cole, who has had an incredible career. Many of these achievements, unbeknownst to me prior to, and I've known him for decades. And we're going to come back with him because he tells such great stories and there's so much to cover. So we're going to come back with him on our next installment of Please Join Me. It would be number 14. And I trust you'll listen in because there's going to be a lot of great stuff that he will tell us next time. This is Joe Traina. Thank you for listening to Please Join Me. You've been listening to Stephen Cole. And everyone be safe out there, and I hope you'll listen in again soon. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Please Join Me with Joe Traina. Be sure to listen anywhere you get your podcasts. Keep up with joetrainamusic.com for news and new episodes. You can listen to Joe's latest recording, Tip of the Hat, on all major streaming services and wherever fine music is sold. This episode was produced by Caroline Voigt.